Top Republican Senator Rand Paul is once again publicly risking incurring the wrath of Donald Trump by returning to Fox News to publicly condemn Donald Trump's economically, militarily, and politically disastrous war on Iran, as well as his overall fiscal irresponsibility. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, folks, I want you to see this full exchange between Rand Paul and Fox Business host Stuart Varney about the war in Iran, as well as the Trump administration's overall fiscal irresponsibility.
Do you want us to walk away from this war right now?
Well, there's a couple of questions. The Constitution outlines how we're supposed to initiate or declare war, and that's supposed to be through a vote of Congress. We haven't done that. We did vote not to have that vote, so there's at least some debate that we've had. Now that we're in the war, there's a question of whether or not it's good for America. I frankly think the biggest threat to America, the biggest threat to our national security, is actually our debt. I don't think we were ever in danger of, Iranian troops or the Navy coming over to the United States. What we are in danger of is getting so overextended. They're talking about another $50 billion they need immediately, but the president's also talking about another $500 billion that he wants to spend on the military. That would be a 50% increase in our military. We currently spend at $1 trillion, which is more than the next 10 countries combined. So I think that you can't be fiscally conservative and be for unlimited warfare.
So, in other words, he's like, yeah, Donald Trump is circumventing the Constitution by declaring war unilaterally on Iran. And at this point, it does seem like the Article 2 power to declare war is effectively dead letter. I mean, some people are saying, well, this is a limited military operation. It's not a full-blown war. And it's like, well, then at what point does a thing become a war? And do we even have wars anymore? Like, this was meant to be one of the greatest powers conferred onto Congress by the founders, and we're just totally sidestepping. And to be clear, Donald Trump isn't the first president to do so, but he is the first president to do so as egregiously as he's done it. Even President Bush went to Congress to seek an authorization for use of military force for his wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So set that aside. But again, it's also nice to hear from a Republican senator about the fiscal irresponsibility of the Trump agenda. Already, yes, we have by far the world's biggest budget on the military, and Trump effectively wants to double it, or at least raise it by 50%. And what's interesting is there were a lot of people on the more left side of politics, or claimed to be on the left side of politics, like Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, who went into the second Trump administration thinking, oh, he's talking about potentially slashing the military budget. Maybe Trump will do that, which is insane because, of course, Trump is quite much more hawkish, even though he adopts the rhetoric of a dove populist. He is much more hawkish than most presidents. So again, kudos to Rand Paul for calling this out, but there's more.
So you'd stop it. You'd stop it right now.
I think it's not good for America. I think what's going to happen is it's going to turn the public also against the president and against the Republican Party. That's a secondary notion.
I just want to stop there because in his previous interview just a couple of days ago with MAGA Fox News host Maria Bartiromo, again, Rand Paul was making the case that right now the midterms are slated to be a total disaster for the Republicans. But the longer this wildly unpopular war drags on, it's almost certainly going to cause much more damage, particularly as gas prices continue to soar. So it is good, again, for the sake of just making the observation that Rand Paul is doing that to Fox News viewers.
Most importantly, the decision on going to war has to be about whether or not it's worth risking American sons and daughters' lives. And I think in this instance, there is no true national interest in having our soldiers there.
So I'm sort of...
I just want to say this real quick, too. Remember, and again, this is not mentioned nearly enough, but I promise you it would be talked about nonstop, ad infinitum, if these deaths had occurred under a Democratic administration like the Biden administration. But 8 American service members have already been confirmed to be killed because of Donald Trump's war on Iran, and 150 have been seriously wounded. That's not talked about nearly enough. So when he talks about the risk to American sons and daughters, many of them have already not just been severely hurt, but they've paid the ultimate sacrifice for Donald Trump's, very hawkish militaristic ambitions.
Press the point, but therefore stop it now.
Yeah, the war should never have begun.
But you stop it. It has begun. Will you stop it now?
Right. The sooner it ends, the better off America will be, the safer our soldiers will be. And I guess I won't apologize for wanting to pray and hope for an end to war. I think the sooner the better. I think if you talk to the families whose young sons and daughters are there, they would also be praying for a swift end to the war. Even the president is sounding more and more like he doesn't want to go on months and months, that he wants the war to come to a close. So I don't think we're that far apart in what we're wishing for.
You see how he has to very cleverly listen. Rand Paul is a libertarian. He, obviously is a registered Republican. He campaigned and holds office as a Republican. He's not an independent, but he's like Thomas Massie, libertarian in inclination, but aligned with the Republican Party politically. What's interesting about Rand Paul, what he just said here, see how he's trying to align Donald Trump, almost like very cleverly manipulate Trump by saying, I don't think that we're too far apart here, right, Mr. President? I think you agree with me, Mr. President. I think I agree with you that we really want this war to end soon, right? Well, again, Donald Trump's all over the place with respect to when the timetable is. He says 2 weeks, 4 weeks, as long as it takes. It's a war. It's not a war, and it's an excursion. It's an excursion to preempt a war. But this is what the Republican Party, even relatively principled Republicans like Rand Paul, he's probably the only one in the Senate, this is what they're reduced to, trying to manipulate Donald Trump into agreeing with them. But that's basically how everybody, from Vladimir Putin to Benjamin Netanyahu to Lindsey Graham to Rand Paul to Marjorie Taylor Greene, it really doesn't matter. This is how people engage with Trump. They're trying to actively manipulate it in real time by appealing to his ego. You're really smart, Mr. President. You obviously agree with this, right, sir? It's pretty transparent and an indictment of how infantile the most powerful man on earth really is.
The best thing would be to win quickly, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it depends on how you define winning. I mean, if you're defining it as unconditional surrender where we get to choose the Ayatollah, I think that's very unrealistic and probably a recipe for being there forever. The other thing about regime change is it doesn't look like the regime is going to fall at this point. I hope they do. I hope the Iranian people rise up. But ultimately, liberty is only really won when a people fight for it, when the people who live there fight for it. So we have decapitated the regime. We've knocked out all the weapons. We have incredible superiority. We have complete rule of the sky and the seas. But in the end, in Venezuela, the same regime is still in Venezuela, and the same regime is still in Iran. So success or winning depends on how you define it.
Well,
and he's going out of his way, Trump is, to avoid defining the terms of success precisely because it creates an objective standard and rubric by which you can evaluate the success of the mission. It's a half-assed regime change effort in Venezuela by allowing Delcy Rodriguez to remain in power, and what remains to be seen how cooperative she'll be. In this case, we assassinated the Ayatollah, and his son is now the new supreme leader of Iran. And reportedly, he's more hawkish and radical than his father ever was, and he's substantially younger as well. So that doesn't particularly bode well. But again, just interesting observation by Rand Paul, Trump's being pretty opaque about how we're going to define success here. Well, that's on purpose.
Okay, Senator, would you vote to fund Homeland Security? Currently, it's not funded, and we've got a partial government shutdown. Would you get out there and vote for it? Say yes, fund it now.
Yeah, I have voted to get on the bill, which means to discuss whether or not it should be funded and what the level is. I will likely vote against the current level because I think it's too much. Last summer, we gave an extra $75 billion to Homeland Security. $45 billion was for a wall, and I asked the question, how much does a wall cost? If you type it in a search engine, our government says it costs about $6 to $8 million a mile. That would be about $6 to $8 billion. Why did they get $46 billion? Why did we spend $220 million on ads, an ad campaign that went to the husband's company of the one person running the PR for the Department of Homeland Security? It was a secondary bid to avoid competitive bidding from a shell corporation that was created 7 days before this happened. There needs to be somebody up here, and I'm proud to be one of the people who ask questions about money, and I'm just not a rubber stamp for more debt.
So again, calling out the Trump administration's fiscal irresponsibility, and of course, this is a campaign and administration that came into office on this idea that they were going to cut waste, fraud, and abuse, and they seem to be unprecedented purveyors of waste, fraud, and abuse. And he mentions there at the end the $220 million ad campaign, which ultimately led to the sacking of Kristi Noem, the former Homeland Security Secretary. Now, the way Kristi Noem has said for years, well, at least since the beginning of the second Trump administration, is that it was Donald Trump's idea for her to be the centerpiece of an ad campaign, kissing his ass and talking about how amazing he is for closing the border. That's not a new development. She said that more than a year ago, so I'm inclined to believe her. You know, when people say, well, Trump didn't approve it, no, Trump absolutely approved it, and the evidence goes back to well before Kristi Noem was fired. Again, basically before she got the job, number one. Number two, it sounds like classic Trump. And number three, you know, he was embarrassed, given how unpopular he is on the economy and everything else, that story was resurrected and he was hit with it, even though he was correct to be hit with it. But what's interesting is, so Rand Paul mentions one aspect of that ad campaign, and we recently found out that the person he's referring to is now actually potentially under investigation. Husband of former DHS spokesperson under Senate investigation for Kristi Noem ad campaign. The husband of former Homeland Security spokesperson Tricia McLaughlin, pictured here, one of the most prolific liars of the Trump administration, is under investigation over a campaign ad that heavily featured Kristi Noem. Days before Trump's decision to relieve her of her duties, Noem testified before Congress to discuss her department's funding. During the hearing, multiple members of Congress grilled Noem on the $220 million that went to subcontractors to fund the ad campaign. The ad, starring Noem, largely focused on the department's deportation efforts. Her alleged ties to the recipients of the contracts led to questions about potential conflicts of interest. In a letter published Tuesday, Senators Peter Welch and Richard Blumenthal announced an investigation into Ben Yoho, McLaughlin's husband. Yoho is part of the strategy group, the firm strategy group, allegedly received part of $143 million contract for the ad campaign. McLaughlin denied any wrongdoing after Republican Senator John Kennedy grilled Noem about the issue in a hearing last week ahead of her firing. And yes, as we discussed in one of those videos, this is hella corrupt because this was not a competitive bid. DHS actually went out of its way to make sure it wasn't a competitive bid so they could effectively funnel it to this person. So this is not good. I'm glad this is under investigation. And if and when Democrats ever retake power in the legislature and the executive, and ideally all the above, this should be relentlessly, viciously investigated. So there you have it, folks. Donald Trump being humiliated by members of his own party on his very favorite news network, and you love to see it. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.